I never take sick days. I mean, I might be dragging myself to work half dead, but I'm there. So, the day I called in was probably the first time in years. Funny too, because I wasn't even that sick, just felt a bit off and thought, why not? I'll surprise Jenna, maybe even take her out for lunch or something. I got home around 11, trying to keep quiet. Jenna should have been there, working on that novel of hers she's been slaving over. 3 years she'd been at it, telling me how this story was her passion, her way to make it as a writer. I always supported her, though I'll admit, I never really got what was so special about it. But, hey, she cared about it, so I did too, or at least pretended to. As I got closer to our bedroom, I heard noises. At first, I thought maybe she had the TV on, but as I pushed the door open, there it was, our landlord, of all people, tangled up with my wife in our bed. They didn't even notice me at first. I stood there, frozen, until Jenna looked up, saw me, and just froze too, like a deer in headlights. And then, she started this acting shocked, like she didn't know how this even happened. Meanwhile, the landlord had this dumb grin wiped clean off his face. It's a weird thing, the way your world just shatters in a second. 1 second, you think you've got everything under control, and the next, you're just left standing there, feeling like you don't know who you are anymore. Jenna tried to stammer out some excuse, something ridiculous about how he was just here to fix the sink, as if that even made sense. I didn't say a word. I just walked out, numb, like I was on autopilot. But as I sat in my car, that numbness faded, and all I felt was rage. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, 100 thoughts at once, but none of them made sense. Part of me wanted to storm back inside and scream at her, ask her how she could do this to me, to us. Another part wanted to punch that landlord's face so hard he'd have to crawl out of our house. But I didn't do any of that. I just sat there, letting the anger simmer. Eventually, I drove around aimlessly, just trying to wrap my head around what I'd seen. 6 years of marriage, and I'd never once thought something like this would happen. Jenna and I had our ups and downs, sure, like any couple, but nothing that would make me suspect she'd go this far. I always thought we were solid, the kind of couple people envied. After a while, I pulled into a park and just sat there. Kept thinking about how Jenna had looked at me, the shock in her eyes, then the guilt, then nothing. She hadn't tried to follow me, hadn't come after me. She just let me walk out. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, my phone buzzed. It was Jenna. At first, I ignored it, but then the texts started coming in one after another. It's not what you think. Please come home. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. The excuses. The lies. Each text made my anger grow until I couldn't even read them anymore. I turned my phone off, needing to think, needing some clarity before I went back to face her. Eventually, I went home. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, and when I walked in, Jenna was sitting on the couch, eyes red from crying. She looked up at me, her face a mix of relief and fear. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Before she could say anything, I sat down across from her, keeping a distance, like there was a wall between us. Explain, I said, my voice cold. Jenna took a shaky breath, wiping her eyes, and launched into some rambling apology, something about how she'd been lonely and confused, about how the landlord had been there for her when I wasn't. I listened, but each word felt like a knife. The excuses, the blame shifting, it was almost insulting. I cut her off. So it's my fault now? You're saying this happened because of me? She tried to backtrack, saying that's not what she meant, but the damage was done. I didn't care about her reasons. All I could see was her, in our bed, with another man. There was no coming back from that. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jenna looked at me and said, I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We've been together too long to throw it all away. I almost laughed. The nerve. After everything, she thought I'd just forgive her, that we could go back to normal. But there was no wing left. Not after what she did. So I just looked at her and said, I want a divorce. Her face went pale. She didn't expect it, like she thought I'd be too weak or too loyal to actually go through with it. She started begging, telling me she'd do anything to fix things, that she'd never see him again, that she'd even go to therapy if that's what it took. But I was done. I stood up, told her to pack her things, and left before she could say another word. I drove around again, aimless, barely feeling the road beneath me. Divorce. I never thought I'd even have to think about that word, let alone say it. Yet here I was, my whole life flipped upside down. All because Jenna had thrown everything we built together right out the window, just for a fling with our landlord. I couldn't get the image out of my mind. The betrayal so fresh, the pain raw. But underneath it, something else was starting to grow. Anger, sure, but something darker too. A need to make her feel the same kind of pain she'd just put me through. That's when it hit me, her novel. That book was her dream, her whole life. For 3 years, she'd been pouring her heart into it, staying up late every night, typing away. She'd spent hours telling me about her characters, her vision, every detail that bored me to death, but I'd sat there, listening, nodding, supporting. That book meant more to her than just about anything. And right then I knew exactly what I had to do. I pulled up to our place a few hours later. Jenna was still there, sitting on the porch, waiting for me. She looked like she'd been crying again, her face blotchy and eyes puffy, but I didn't feel a thing. She called out to me as I walked past her, begging me to talk, but I ignored her. I had one goal in mind. I went straight upstairs to her little writing corner, a spot she'd set up by the window with her desk and her notebooks, everything in perfect order. Her laptop was open, and I knew that was it, the novel she'd spent every waking moment on, her dream of becoming an author. I felt a pang of guilt, just a flash, but I pushed it down. She'd made her choice, and now I was making mine. Without a second thought, I hit select all and delete. Just like that, 3 years of her work vanished in seconds. I emptied the recycle bin, making sure there was no way she could ever get it back. I even grabbed her notebooks and tore them up, scattering the pages across the room. By the time I was done, her dream looked like a pile of trash. Jenna came upstairs, probably hearing the noise, and froze in the doorway, her face going white as she saw the mess. What did you do?" she whispered, voice trembling. I turned to her, calm as I'd ever been. "I gave you a taste of what you did to me. You think you can just betray me and walk away? I loved you, and you threw it all away. Now you know what that feels like." She started crying, hands to her mouth as she looked around the room, realizing everything she'd worked for was gone. But I felt nothing, just a cold satisfaction. The next few days were chaos. Jenna was in denial at first, acting like she could somehow fix this, as if an apology and a few tears would make me forget what she'd done. She tried calling, texting, leaving these long voicemails where she'd cry and say she was sorry, that she still loved me. But I couldn't care less. I'd already made up my mind. I barely went home. Stayed at a buddy's place, crashing on his couch while I got my head together. I didn't tell him everything at first, just that things with Jenna were over. He asked if I was all right, and I said yeah, but I don't think he believed me. How could he? I didn't even believe myself. I finally went back to the house a few days later to grab my stuff. Walking into that place, knowing what happened there, made me feel sick. I wanted nothing to do with it. Jenna was there, waiting in the living room, looking more put together than the last time I saw her, but I could still see the desperation in her eyes. "Please, can we just talk?" she started, but I didn't stop to listen. I walked past her, straight to the bedroom, and started packing my clothes into a bag. I heard her behind me, trying to explain, her voice trembling as she stumbled over her words. "It didn't mean anything, okay? I was just lonely and he was there and I don't know what I was thinking. But I never wanted to hurt you." I turned around and looked her in the eyes. "Didn't mean anything? You threw away 6 years for something that didn't mean anything? And now I'm supposed to just forgive you? Move past it?" She started crying, clutching her hands together like she was praying or something. "I know I messed up. I know that, but please, can we just try again? I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, whatever you want." But I was done. I was so far past done, I couldn't even remember what it felt like to love her. "You don't get it, Jenna. You already took everything from me. Our trust, our future. I can't just pretend it never happened. And by the way, that novel? It's gone. Deleted, destroyed. Consider it payback? Her face dropped, her eyes widening in shock. No, you didn't. Please tell me you didn't? I shrugged. Why not? You took something from me. I just took something back. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing, and I just stood there, watching her, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was cruel, but I didn't care. In that moment, I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, just as heavy and painful as I'd felt it. Without another word, I grabbed my bag, walked out, and left her alone in that empty house. I didn't look back. After leaving that house, I went to a cheap motel, somewhere far enough from all the places that reminded me of her. I thought it'd be easy to move on, like ripping off a band-aid, but it wasn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see her face, the look of shock and betrayal when I told her about the novel, the disbelief that I was actually done with her. And honestly, part of me felt a little guilty. I don't know why. I shouldn't have. After what she did, she deserved everything coming her way. Still, there was this nagging thought that maybe I'd gone too far. But then I'd remember what I'd walked in on, and that guilt would turn back into anger. I'd scroll through my phone, flipping past all the texts from her that I hadn't bothered to open. The voicemails piled up too, but I couldn't bring myself to listen to her voice. I didn't want to hear whatever excuse she'd come up with, whatever new version of the story she'd try to sell. In her mind, she was probably the victim, and I was the villain who'd thrown it all away. After a week in that motel, I went to see a lawyer. Sitting in his office, explaining what happened, it felt surreal, like I was talking about someone else's life. The lawyer listened, took notes, nodded like he'd heard it all before. And maybe he had. I want a clean break, I told him. No dragging this out, no fighting over stupid things. I just want out. He nodded, his pen scratching across the paper. We can file for a no-fault divorce. If she doesn't contest it, you could be done in a few months. But he hesitated. There's still the matter of splitting assets. You're sure she won't fight you on it? Honestly? I don't know, I admitted. But I don't care about the house or the stuff in it. She can have it all for all I care. He gave me a strange look, but he didn't press. Maybe he thought I was being hasty, making decisions in the heat of the moment, but I didn't care. The sooner I could get Jenna and that house behind me, the better. When I finally filed the papers, something shifted. I can't even describe it, but it was like this weight had been lifted off my chest. Like I could finally breathe. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd buried in that relationship. I'd put Jenna first, her dreams, her plans, her happiness, and look where it had gotten me. All I wanted now was to live life on my own terms again, whatever that meant. A few weeks passed and I focused on work, trying to rebuild some kind of routine. My friends started to notice something was off. They'd ask why Jenna wasn't around, and at first I dodged the question, mumbling something about needing space. But eventually the truth came out, and everyone reacted pretty much the same. Shock, followed by sympathy, and then, inevitably, advice. Dude, you should get out there, meet new people, one of my friends suggested. You can't let this eat you up. Jenna's not worth it. It sounded good in theory, but I wasn't ready for that yet. I barely recognized myself, let alone wanted to put myself out there. Nights in the motel turned into hours of scrolling through dating apps, looking at faces of people I didn't know and couldn't care less about. I'd swipe left, all while thinking of Jenna and wondering if she was doing the same, out there, looking for someone else to fill the gap I'd left. One night, though, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when my phone buzzed with a text. It was Jenna. For some reason, maybe curiosity or a moment of weakness, I opened it. I know I've hurt you and I'm sorry. I know you're mad, but please don't hate me forever. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, but I didn't know what to say. Did I hate her? I wasn't even sure. There was a hollow spot inside me where something used to be, love, trust, maybe both. But all that was left now was emptiness and a little bit of bitterness. So I didn't reply. I just shut off my phone and went back to sleep. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, things started to feel normal again. My friend offered me a place to crash, and I finally left the motel, settling into a spare room in his apartment. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts, anything to keep my mind occupied. But then, one day, I got a call from Jenna's mom. "Hey, it's been a while," she started, her voice soft, like she was trying to tiptoe around something delicate. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're holding up." "Fine," I replied, keeping it short, not in the mood for small talk. "She's not doing well, you know," she said after a pause. "Jenna, she's been a mess." This has hit her hard. I bit my tongue, holding back a sarcastic response. A mess? She was the one who'd wrecked everything. But of course, her mom would see it differently. Parents always do. "She's trying though," her mom continued. "Trying to make things right. Maybe you could give her another chance?" That was it. I couldn't hold back anymore. Another chance? Do you have any idea what she did? Her mom was quiet for a moment, probably taken aback by the sharpness in my tone. "She told me some of it," she finally said, hesitantly. "I know she hurt you. But she's been through a lot too." I let out a bitter laugh. "So now she's the victim?" "You know what, I don't want to hear it. Jenna made her choice. She can live with it." And with that, I hung up. Hearing from her mom only made me more determined to move forward. Jenna could play the victim all she wanted, tell herself whatever story she needed to feel better. But I was done. I'd spent years building a life around her dreams, her goals. Now, it was time to figure out who I was without her. A few days after that call, I went out with a few friends, just to clear my head. We ended up at a bar, laughing, talking, doing anything but thinking about Jenna. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt like myself again. No pressure, no pretending, just me and my friends, like it used to be. Then, in the middle of the night as we were heading home, I got another text from Jenna. "I'm sorry really. I just want to talk." I didn't reply. I couldn't go back to that, couldn't let her reel me back into her drama. She'd made her choice, and I was sticking to mine. For once in my life, I was going to put myself first. And I'd keep doing that, no matter how many times she tried to pull me back. After that night, something in me shifted. I was tired of thinking about Jenna, tired of letting her control my every thought, even if it was in anger or regret. I needed to move on, really move on, and that meant making some changes. I decided to leave my friend's apartment and get a place of my own. I found a small one-bedroom on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I filled it with stuff that I actually liked, no reminders of Jenna, no old furniture we'd bought together, none of her little knickknacks that used to clutter up our house. This place was a clean slate, just for me. Setting up that apartment felt like a fresh start. I'd pick up random pieces of furniture from thrift shops, spent a whole afternoon painting the walls a deep navy blue, something Jenna would have hated, and found myself actually enjoying it. It wasn't just a place to sleep, it was my own space, somewhere I could come back to at the end of the day and feel like I belonged there. But even with this new start, Jenna kept trying to worm her way back into my life. She'd call sometimes, usually late at night, and I'd just stare at the phone, watching it buzz until it stopped. Every now and then, a text would pop up, short and desperate. "Please just talk to me. I don't know how to do this without you. I miss you. I'm so sorry. Can we just meet up once? Just to talk?" I didn't reply. Not once. Blocking her felt tempting, but somehow I liked knowing that she was out there, wanting something she could never have back. Maybe it was petty, but I didn't care. She had her chance. Meanwhile, work became my escape. I'd pick up extra shifts, throw myself into every project they'd give me. It kept me busy and kept my mind off things. I'd spend long hours at the office, and on the weekends, I'd take on freelance jobs, mostly just to fill the time. My friends would drag me out for a drink now and then, but for the most part, I kept to myself. I didn't mind. It felt like I was rebuilding myself, piece by piece, without the weight of a relationship tying me down. Months went by, and the calls from Jenna stopped. The texts dwindled too, and one day, I noticed she'd finally given up. It felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I could go about my day without feeling that shadow of her lurking behind me. One afternoon, I ran into a mutual friend of ours, Jenna's old college friend, Sarah. She spotted me at the grocery store of all places and immediately made her way over, looking way too eager. "Hey. Wow, it's been a while," she said, giving me a quick hug. I nodded, keeping it polite. I didn't want to hear whatever she had to say about Jenna, but something told me I wasn't getting out of it that easy. Yeah, been busy, I replied, grabbing a box of cereal, hoping to keep it short. But of course, she wasn't there to just say hi. Listen, I saw Jenna recently. She started looking at me like she was waiting for some kind of reaction. Kept my face blank. She's not doing so well. I shrugged. Not my problem. Sarah hesitated, glancing around like she was searching for the right words. I get it. I mean, after everything that happened, I don't blame you. But she's really struggling. She hasn't been able to write since you left. The irony of it almost made me laugh. Her writing career, the one thing she put above everything else, even me, and now, because of her own actions, she'd lost it. But I kept my face neutral. Look, Sarah, I don't know what you want me to say. Jenna made her choices, and now she's dealing with the consequences. I'm done with her. Whatever's going on in her life, it's not my responsibility. Sarah nodded, clearly uncomfortable. I get it. I do. I just thought, you might want to know. I gave her a curt nod, threw my groceries in the cart, and walked away. The last thing I needed was a guilt trip from Jenna's friend. Whatever pain Jenna was feeling now was nothing compared to what she'd put me through. I wasn't about to feel sorry for her just because things hadn't worked out in her favor. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but think about what Sarah had said. The old me would have cared, maybe even tried to reach out and make sure Jenna was okay. But the old me was gone. Jenna had made sure of that. Now, all that was left was me and the life I was building for myself. I didn't need her problems, her excuses, or her apologies. I was done letting her dictate how I felt. After running into Sarah, I felt like I had to shake off the past all over again. Hearing about Jenna's struggle, knowing she hadn't been able to write since I left, made me feel a twisted kind of satisfaction. But it also stirred something else in me, something I didn't want to admit. Guilt, maybe, or at least a sliver of it. The reality of what I'd done, deleting her work, settled in, not as something I regretted exactly, but as a reminder of just how far I'd gone to hurt her. I tried not to think about it, but the next few days felt different. I went through the motions. Work, the gym, a quick drink with a friend here and there. My new life, this blank slate, still felt good, but a part of me was getting restless. I'd carved out this space for myself, but now I had to figure out what to fill it with. One night, as I was scrolling through my phone, I came across a picture of Jenna and me. It was from our 3rd anniversary, a random day we'd spent hiking. We'd stopped at the top of the trail, sweaty and out of breath, and took this selfie with huge, ridiculous grins. Looking at it now felt strange. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd smiled like that, felt that free. I almost didn't recognize the guy in the photo, the guy who believed in that life we'd been building together. I'd buried him somewhere along the way. I knew I needed to move on, but it wasn't as easy as everyone made it sound. All the just get over hurt advice from friends felt hollow. It wasn't that I wanted her back, I didn't. But something had shifted in me that I wasn't sure how to fix. I couldn't just move on like I'd moved apartments or changed jobs. This was deeper. I had to find something to live for that didn't revolve around what Jenna had done or hadn't done. A few days later, I decided to shake things up and signed up for a weekend photography class. It was one of those random ideas that came to me as I was flipping through a magazine. I remembered how I used to be into photography way back before Jenna and I got serious. I'd even thought about buying a camera once, but the idea got lost in the mix of responsibilities, her needs, and our life together. The class was small, maybe 5 people, and I was the only one there under 50. Everyone else was retired, mostly there to learn how to take better pictures of their grandkids or vacations. At first, I felt out of place, but as we got into it, something clicked. There was something grounding about learning something new, about focusing on capturing a moment instead of obsessing over the past. The instructor handed us some cameras and sent us out to take pictures around the park. I found myself looking at things differently, noticing details I would have walked right past a few weeks ago. The way the light hit the leaves, the way people moved through the space around them. It was like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten, a part that had been buried under years of compromise and betrayal. After the class, I spent hours looking through the photos I'd taken. They weren't great, but there was something about them that felt real, almost like pieces of me I was putting back together. For the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't anger or numbness. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how much I'd let Jenna take from me. It wasn't just my trust or our marriage, it was pieces of myself I'd given up to keep her happy, to make our relationship work. Photography, hobbies, even the friends I'd lost touch with, all of it had faded into the background because I'd made her my world. I realized I didn't want that anymore. I wanted a life that was mine, filled with things I loved, things I could control. Jenna had taken enough from me, and I wasn't about to let her take anything else. Over the next few weeks, I started doing more of the things I'd forgotten about. I'd go on random hikes, snapping pictures, or spend a quiet Saturday afternoon at the park, just watching people and capturing moments. Sometimes, I'd even go out with my camera at night, just walking through the city and seeing where my feet took me. It felt strange, doing things for myself after years of bending to someone else's needs, but it also felt right. One evening, I got a call from an old friend, Mike. He'd heard through the grapevine what had happened, and he was checking in. We hadn't talked much in years, but we'd been close once, back in college, before life got in the way. "Man, I don't even know what to say," he started. "I had no idea what you were going through. Why didn't you reach out?" I shrugged, even though he couldn't see me. Guess I didn't want to talk about it. Didn't feel real for a long time. We talked for a while, catching up on each other's lives. Mike had gotten married, had a kid, bought a house out in the suburbs. He invited me over, said I should come by for a barbecue sometime, maybe catch up with some old friends. For the first time, it didn't feel like just small talk. I actually wanted to go. A week later, I found myself at Mike's place, surrounded by old friends and people I hadn't seen in years. They welcomed me in like no time had passed, and it felt good, normal. We swapped stories, laughed about stupid things we did in college, and for once, I felt like a part of something bigger than just my own struggles. The weight of everything with Jenna started to feel a little lighter, like maybe it was finally loosening its grip on me. As the night went on, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge, and I didn't need to dwell on what Jenna had done. I didn't need her pain or her apologies to validate what I'd gone through. All I needed was to rebuild my own life, piece by piece, until the past was just a story I could tell without feeling like it still owned me. That night, as I left Mike's place and drove back to my own apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Real hope, not just the numb sense of moving on everyone kept telling me about. It was hope that I could be myself again, that maybe, somewhere down the line, I'd be whole again. With each day, it felt like I was finally building a life that didn't revolve around Jenna or what she'd done. The photography hobby grew from a weekend distraction into something I looked forward to every day. I'd take my camera out to new spots around the city, finding hidden corners, little moments of life that I'd never noticed before. The world felt bigger, more open, like I'd been seeing it through a keyhole all these years and finally kicked the door open. One Saturday, I decided to check out a new art gallery opening downtown. It was a small place tucked away on a side street, and the crowd was minimal. I figured I'd breeze through, check out a few exhibits, and maybe get some inspiration for my own photos. I'd been getting good enough to think about putting together a portfolio someday, maybe even submit a few pieces to a local show. I wandered from room to room, each one filled with different styles, themes, and vibes. Abstract paintings in one corner, black and white photography in another. Then, as I rounded a corner, I froze. There, standing a few feet away, staring at a sculpture of twisted metal, was Jenna. She didn't see me right away, too absorbed in whatever she was looking at, but my heart started racing. For a second, I thought about slipping out, avoiding the awkwardness entirely. But something made me stay, made me keep watching her as she stood there, lost in thought. She looked different, thinner, like she hadn't been sleeping much. Her clothes were more casual than I remembered. She always used to dress up, even for a quick trip to the store. But now, she looked ordinary. For the first time, she didn't seem larger than life. She was just Jenna, someone I used to know. Before I could make up my mind about leaving or staying, she looked up and spotted me. Her eyes widened, and I saw a flash of shock, maybe even a bit of fear, like she wasn't sure how I'd react. I gave her a small nod, keeping it neutral, and then turned to leave, hoping to avoid a confrontation. "Wait," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow it stopped me in my tracks. I sighed, turning back to face her, mentally bracing myself for whatever came next. She walked over, her movements hesitant, like she wasn't sure if I'd push her away. When she finally stopped a few feet from me, there was an awkward silence, just the faint hum of background music filling the space between us. "Hey," she said, her voice soft, almost timid. "Hey," I replied, keeping my tone flat. She looked down, fiddling with the strap of her purse. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, same," I said, keeping it short, unsure if I wanted this conversation to go anywhere. Another pause stretched between us, uncomfortable and heavy. She shifted on her feet, biting her lip like she was working up the courage to say something. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, maybe regret, maybe desperation. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling a little. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm really, truly sorry." I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. Months ago, I would have given anything to hear those words, to see some kind of remorse in her. But now, standing there, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. It was like the apology didn't even matter anymore. I was already past it, past needing anything from her. "Thanks," I said, shrugging. "But I don't need an apology, Jenna. Not anymore." She blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "I know you're angry. I know you have every right to be, but I never meant to hurt you like that." A part of me wanted to laugh. She'd said those same words in different ways over countless texts and voicemails, each one just as hollow as the last. But I didn't laugh. I just looked at her, seeing her not as the woman I'd once loved, but as someone who was, in many ways, a stranger. "I'm not angry anymore, Jenna. I think I'm just done," I replied, my voice calm, almost detached. She looked away, clearly shaken. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered, almost to herself. "That's the thing. You can't," I said, shaking my head. "What's broken is broken. I'm moving on, and I think it's time you did too." For a second, she looked like she might cry, but she quickly composed herself, nodding as if she understood, even though I could tell she didn't. We stood there in silence for a moment, neither of us knowing what else to say. Finally, I decided to end it. "Well, take care of yourself, Jenna," I said, giving her a small nod before turning to leave. I felt her eyes on me as I walked away, but I didn't look back. There was no need. Whatever closure I thought I'd needed, I realized I'd already found it on my own. Her apology didn't mean anything, not really. I'd been waiting for it, expecting it to be some magic fix, but in the end, I didn't need it to move on. As I left the gallery, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was like finally putting a book back on the shelf, knowing I'd never have to read it again. Jenna was a part of my past, a chapter I'd closed, and seeing her there, vulnerable and remorseful, only confirmed that I'd made the right choice. Walking through the city streets that evening, the weight of it all seemed to lift a little more. I'd been carrying around so much anger, so much resentment, but now it was gone. The old me, the me who thought he needed Jenna to be happy, was gone too. In his place was someone new, someone I was finally starting to like. The night air was cool, crisp, and I felt something strange in my chest. A lightness, a freedom I hadn't felt in years. I stopped for a moment, breathing it in, feeling the thrill of being free from it all. Jenna's betrayal, her excuses, her apologies, none of it mattered anymore. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was really, truly free. After running into Jenna, something shifted. Seeing her again had been strange, but in a way, it felt like the final piece of closure I didn't realize I needed. Now, I could move on without any lingering what-ifs or anger weighing me down. I threw myself deeper into photography, signing up for a few more classes, and even connecting with some local artists. My weekends were full of solo photo excursions, exploring new places, experimenting with different styles. It felt like I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried, parts that had nothing to do with Jenna or my old life. One Saturday, I got invited to display my photos in a small community art show. It was nothing big, just a local event, but when I saw my work hanging on that wall, something lit up in me. Friends showed up, a few strangers even asked about my work, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was creating something that mattered, to me, if no one else. After the show, I walked through the city alone, my camera in hand, feeling a deep sense of contentment. I didn't need anyone else's validation. For the first time, my life was fully my own, and that was enough. One evening, I was out in the city, camera in hand, just wandering and snapping photos. The light was perfect, that golden hour glow, and I was so focused on capturing it that I didn't even notice anyone nearby, until someone spoke up. "That's a beautiful shot. You have a great eye." I looked up, startled, and saw a woman about my age standing nearby, also holding a camera. She had this relaxed smile and a calm energy about her. We started chatting, and it turned out she was a photographer too, with a background in art. Her name was Emily, and she'd recently moved to the city to work on her own projects. We talked about photography, what we loved to capture, and even traded tips on lighting and angles. There was something refreshing about her. She didn't know anything about my past, didn't see me as someone with baggage. She just saw me, a fellow artist who happened to be passionate about capturing the world through a lens. As the sun set, she suggested we grab a coffee, and I agreed without hesitation. We spent hours in a small cafe, sharing stories and laughing about things we'd seen around the city. It felt easy, natural, like reconnecting with an old friend even though we just met. When we finally said goodnight, she gave me a quick smile. "Let's do this again sometime. There's a whole city out there waiting to be captured." Walking home, I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about getting to know someone new. After that night, Emily and I started meeting up regularly. Sometimes we'd grab coffee and talk. Other times we'd go on spontaneous photo walks through different parts of the city. She'd show me spots I'd never thought to explore, little hidden gems that held so much character. One weekend, we decided to visit a nearby beach at sunrise. I'd never been one for early mornings, but something about the idea of watching the world wake up through my camera felt right. Emily and I found a quiet spot on the sand, and as the sky started to glow with shades of pink and orange, we snapped photos, hardly talking, just letting the moment sink in. At some point, I looked over at her, watching as she lined up a shot, her face calm and focused. It was rare to meet someone who could be fully present, someone who wasn't rushing to the next thing. There was a kind of peace around her, and I realized that for the first time in a long while, I felt calm too. Afterward, we sat on a rock, our cameras resting on our laps, watching the waves roll in. Emily glanced at me, her expression thoughtful. "You know, I don't think I've ever met someone who sees things the way you do," she said. "It's like you're looking for something but not in a desperate way. More like you're just open to whatever comes your way." Her words caught me off guard. I'd spent so much time trying to get over my past that I hadn't realized I'd changed, that I was no longer chasing anything or anyone. I was just here in the moment, taking things as they came. "Maybe that's true," I replied, surprised at my own response. "For the first time, I don't feel like I'm running from anything." She gave me a soft smile. "That's a rare thing to find, you know. Most people are so wrapped up in either their past or their future that they forget to live in the present." We sat there in silence, the ocean stretching out before us, and I felt something shift. This connection was different, not rushed, not weighed down by expectations. It was simple, honest. And for the first time, I let myself just be in it without wondering where it would go. Over the next few weeks, my time with Emily became the highlight of my days. We kept things light, but I couldn't ignore the pull I felt around her. She had this easy way of seeing the world, and it was contagious. With her, I didn't have to pretend, didn't have to carry the weight of old scars. We just clicked. One day, she invited me to a community art show where she was exhibiting some of her recent work. It was a small, casual gathering, the kind I would have never bothered with before. But when I saw her photos displayed on the wall, her perspective on the world around us, I felt a surge of pride, like I was seeing her in a whole new light. After the show, we celebrated with a quiet dinner. At one point, she looked at me, her eyes serious. You should think about doing a show too. I've seen your photos. They deserve to be out there, for other people to experience. I laughed, brushing it off. I'm just doing this for fun. I don't know if I'm ready to put myself out there like that. But she didn't let it go. You're better than you think, she insisted. Your photos, they tell a story. You capture the quiet moments, the ones people often miss. I think people need to see that. Her words stayed with me long after that night. Emily saw something in me I hadn't recognized in myself yet, a purpose beyond just moving on. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and finally share something real, something that was all mine. A few days later, I made a decision. I reached out to a small gallery I'd heard about, just to ask a few questions. It wasn't a commitment, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was on the verge of something entirely my own. After that call to the gallery, things moved faster than I expected. They invited me to bring in a sample of my work, and before I knew it, I was sitting across from the gallery manager, talking about a possible showcase. I felt a mix of excitement and nerves I hadn't felt in years, like I was stepping into unknown territory. With Emily's encouragement, I went through my photos, picking out the ones that meant the most to me. Each shot held a piece of my journey, the quiet city streets, the hidden corners, the places I'd wandered through in my search for peace. I even included a few shots from that sunrise at the beach with her, the ones that felt like a turning point. The gallery manager looked through my selection, nodding thoughtfully. Your work has a quiet strength to it, she said, finally. It's not loud, but it resonates. I think people will connect with that. Hearing those words felt surreal. For so long I'd been lost, just trying to get through the day, and now here I was, ready to share this part of myself with strangers. Part of me still felt unprepared, but a bigger part felt ready. The opening night of the exhibit came faster than I'd anticipated. Friends showed up, including a few I hadn't seen in years, and the gallery filled with people I didn't even know. I watched as they walked through the room, pausing to take in each image, and for the first time, I felt seen, not as someone recovering from a past, but as someone with his own story to tell. Emily was there too, standing beside me with that supportive smile I'd come to depend on. She looked around the room, then back at me. I told you people would connect with your work, she said, her voice filled with pride. You did this. I nodded, a quiet warmth spreading through me. For the first time, I could see a future that wasn't about loss or betrayal. It was about creating, connecting, and finding my own place in the world. And right there, in that gallery, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, hope. The weeks following the gallery show were some of the best I'd had in years. People reached out, asking about my photos, inviting me to other art events, even commissioning a few pieces. It felt like a new world opening up, a world where I was doing something that mattered, something that was mine. Emily and I kept getting closer too. There was an ease to being with her, like we both understood each other's quiet moments. But as things got serious, I knew I needed to close the last chapter of my old life for good. One evening, I sat down with a box I hadn't touched since I moved out of the place I'd shared with Jenna. Inside were bits and pieces of our life together. Old photos, cards, little souvenirs from trips we'd taken. At first, I'd kept it all out of habit, some part of me thinking I needed those memories. But looking at them now, I realized they didn't hold the weight they once did. I sorted through everything slowly, taking one last look at the life I'd left behind. Each piece felt like it belonged to someone else, a version of me who didn't exist anymore. And that was okay. I didn't need the reminders. I'd learned what I needed from that part of my life, and it was time to let the rest go. The next day, I dropped off the box at a donation center, leaving it all behind. Driving away, I felt lighter, like I'd finally cleared out the last shadows of that old relationship. That night, I invited Emily over, and we shared a quiet dinner. At some point, I looked at her, realizing just how much she'd come to mean to me. She wasn't just someone who'd filled a void, she'd shown me a new way to live, a way to find meaning in my own story. As we sat there, I took her hand, feeling grateful. For the first time, I wasn't haunted by my past. I was ready to build something real, something rooted in the present, with her by my side. With the past finally put to rest, I felt a freedom I hadn't known in years. Emily and I grew closer with each passing day. We'd make plans without overthinking, meet up for late-night drives, or spend hours photographing the city just for fun. She'd become more than just a person who helped me heal. She was someone I genuinely wanted to share my life with. One weekend, we decided to take a trip out of town, a spontaneous escape to a quiet cabin near the mountains. No phones, no distractions, just us and the open landscape. We spent the days hiking, exploring new trails, and capturing the beauty around us, but mostly, we enjoyed each other's company. In the evenings, we'd sit by the fire, talking for hours about our dreams, our fears, and everything in between. On our last night, as we sat under a sky full of stars, I felt this overwhelming sense of clarity. I realized that for the first time in so long, I was truly content. I didn't need anything else. This was my fresh start, my new chapter, and I was ready to live it. Looking at Emily, I saw someone who understood every part of my journey without me having to explain it. And in that moment, I knew I wanted to keep building this life with her, one filled with creativity, honesty, and the quiet peace we'd both been searching for. Here's to new beginnings, I said, raising an imaginary glass in a quiet toast. She smiled, her eyes warm as she nodded. To new beginnings, she echoed. And just like that, under the stars and with her by my side, I felt like I'd finally found my way home.